The crowd froze. Even Kirk's own fans couldn't believe what he just said. The room, moments ago buzzing with cheap applause and predictable talking points, fell into a stunned, uncomfortable silence. Charlie Kirk, standing under the blinding lights of a university auditorium, leaned into the microphone with a smirk that seemed to dare anyone to challenge him. "Some people," he said, drawing out each word like a provocation, "don't belong in the conversation about America if they can't even trace their lineage here. Maybe they should focus on fixing their own countries instead of lecturing us about ours." A few scattered cheers broke the tension, but even those sounded uncertain. You could see the arrogance in Kirk's posture, the cocky tilt of his head, the casual shrug that followed, the performance of certainty that had carried him through 1,000 soundbites before. It was the kind of moment that plays well in echo chambers, but this wasn't an echo chamber. This was a public debate, and across from him sat someone who had heard words like that her entire life, and refused to be defined by them. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't interrupt, didn't even shift in her chair. She just watched him, calm, focused, patient, the way a prosecutor watches a witness talk himself into a corner. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Kirk, feeding off outrage, desperate for dominance. Crockett, anchored in composure, letting the silence work for her. Viewers watching online would later say they felt the tension through their screens. They knew something was coming, and Kirk, basking in his own rhetoric, had no idea that he'd just handed Jasmine the perfect opening, because what he'd framed as a throwaway insult was more than offensive. It was revealing. It exposed a mindset, a worldview, a fear masquerading as strength, and Crockett, with that still, deliberate poise, was about to dismantle it piece by piece. But Jasmine wasn't about to let this go unchallenged. And what she said next would detonate across America. This wasn't just another internet clip. It wasn't just another viral moment destined to fade into the endless scroll of political outrage. What unfolded on that stage was a microcosm of something far bigger, a battle line drawn in the heart of America's identity crisis. Charlie Kirk's comment wasn't simply ignorant. It was part of a long-running campaign to weaponize resentment, to pit real Americans against anyone who dares challenge the myths he profits from. And in that room, under those hot stage lights, he wasn't speaking just for himself. He was voicing a worldview that has been echoing through talk shows, state legislatures, and social media feeds for years. A worldview that says some people will never belong, no matter how deeply they love this country. Kirk has built an empire out of that idea. Through his organization, his podcast, and a relentless media presence, he's turned provocation into a business model. It's a formula as predictable as it is toxic. Pick a target, often immigrants, often women, often people of color. Reduce them to a talking point, and declare them the threat. His words are designed to go viral, to outrage, to harden divides, and for years it's worked. Audiences cheer, clips rack up millions of views, and the cycle continues, division as content, hate as engagement. But this time, something was different. Because facing him was Jasmine Crockett, a rising Democratic star whose entire career has been built on dismantling narratives like his. Sharp, fearless, and unflinching, Crockett is part of a new wave of leaders who don't just debate opponents, they expose them. She represents a vision of America that doesn't shrink from its complexity, that sees diversity as strength, not threat. And she wasn't stepping onto that stage just to win an argument. She was there to challenge an entire worldview. The stakes stretched far beyond the walls of that auditorium. For millions watching online, this wasn't Kirk versus Crockett. It was a test of what kind of country America wants to be. Are we a nation defined by fear and exclusion, or one defined by courage and inclusion? Are we a place where arrogance can shout unchecked, or where accountability finally speaks louder? And as Kirk's words began to circulate online, those questions grew louder. The clip hit Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram within minutes. Some hailed Kirk's truth bombs as bravery. Others saw it for what it was, a dog whistle wrapped in faux patriotism. But the debate wasn't over yet. It hadn't even truly begun. Because while Kirk was basking in the attention his provocation always brings, Jasmine Crockett was preparing a response that wouldn't just counter his point, it would expose the rotten foundation beneath it. Could one viral moment shift the entire conversation on truth versus propaganda? Could a single exchange crack the armor of a media machine built on outrage? Those were the questions hanging in the air as the night unfolded. And behind Crockett's calm exterior, something powerful was building, a rebuttal forged not in anger, but in conviction. The cameras were still rolling. The crowd was still buzzing. And somewhere deep down, even Kirk's most loyal followers sensed it. The next words spoken on that stage could change everything, and as the cameras rolled, things took a turn no one expected. To understand the weight of what was happening on that stage, you have to understand the man behind the microphone. Because Charlie Kirk isn't just another pundit with a podcast and a microphone. He's a product of a carefully built machine, one that has spent over a decade perfecting the art of outrage and weaponizing division. Kirk didn't rise to prominence by accident. His story is a blueprint for how inflammatory rhetoric can become influence, and how power built on provocation can start to crumble under its own weight. His story begins in the early 2010s, when Kirk was a young conservative activist railing against what he saw as liberal dominance on college campuses. At just 18, he founded Turning Point USA, a nonprofit he promised would fight back against the supposed indoctrination of America's youth. It started as a shoestring operation: flyers, speaking tours, rallies in half-filled auditoriums. But Kirk had something few others did: a gift for turning complex political debates into viral one-liner soundbites. He spoke not like a policy expert, but like a street fighter, hammering phrases that would ricochet across social media. Socialism sucks. Diversity hires. Make professors afraid again. It worked. Conservative donors, hungry for a youthful face to front their movement, poured money into Turning Point. College tours grew into arena-sized conferences. Kirk's audience ballooned. And soon, his sound bites weren't just trending on Twitter. They were shaping Republican talking points in Congress and on cable news. The kid from the suburbs had become a kingmaker, hosting presidential candidates on stage and whispering in the ears of power. But beneath the meteoric rise, a pattern was taking shape, one that would define Kirk's playbook and ultimately lead to the moment we're telling now. His strategy was simple: pick a target, distort their views into an easy-to-hate caricature, and then burn that straw man to the ground. A young climate activist becomes a spoiled communist. A professor calling for equity becomes anti-white. A congresswoman talking about systemic racism hates America. Over and over, Kirk wielded this formula: short, sharp, and almost always detached from nuance, to ignite rage and harvest engagement. And when he wasn't building strawmen, he was staging traps. Kirk is notorious for inviting ideological opponents onto his platform, not to debate them in good faith, but to bait them into clips he can cut, caption, and blast across the internet. He knows how to use a pause, how to raise his voice just enough to make a moment seem more explosive than it is, how to feed his audience the feeling of righteous indignation they've come to expect. It's not debate, it's theater, and Kirk is one of its most seasoned performers. Yet with that performance came controversy, and plenty of it. Over the years, Kirk has been called out repeatedly for spreading misinformation, from false claims about election fraud to distorted statistics about immigration and crime. He's defended authoritarian leaders abroad while claiming to be a champion of freedom at home. He's decried identity politics while building an entire brand around vilifying specific identities. And time and again, when challenged on these contradictions, Kirk leans on the same defense: shift the topic, double down, and accuse critics of being too emotional to handle the truth. It's a strategy that served him well, until now. Because while Kirk thrives in echo chambers, reality is harder to bend in the presence of someone who won't play his game. And Jasmine Crockett isn't someone who plays games. Her composure, her refusal to take the bait, her insistence on grounding the conversation in facts and humanity. These are the very tools that make Kirk's usual tricks falter. They're also the tools that leave his contradictions exposed for everyone to see. Even Kirk's supporters have noticed the cracks. In recent years, his rhetoric has become more frantic, more extreme, as if he senses the tide shifting. Younger conservatives are questioning his tactics. Critics within his own party accuse him of caring more about clicks than principles. And while his influence is still immense, it's built on a foundation that's starting to show its fractures. Which brings us back to that stage, the one where Kirk delivered yet another one of his trademark tirades. Certain that his formula would work as it always had. The insult, the arrogance, the applause line, it was all part of the script. What he didn't realize was that across from him sat someone who had studied that script and was about to rewrite it entirely. Because this time, his usual playbook was about to backfire, spectacularly. To understand why Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch under Charlie Kirk's arrogance, you have to understand the path that brought her there. A path carved not by privilege or shortcuts, but by relentless grit and an unshakable belief that justice is worth fighting for, no matter how steep the climb. Jasmine Crockett's story doesn't begin in the halls of Congress or under the glare of studio lights. It begins in the humbler corners of America, where hard work isn't a choice, it's a necessity. Raised in a working-class family in St. Louis, she learned early that the world doesn't hand out fairness freely. You have to demand it. Her parents, rooted in faith and service, taught her that dignity isn't about wealth or status. It's about what you stand for when the odds are stacked against you. They taught her that voices like theirs, like hers, weren't always welcomed in the rooms where decisions were made. But that didn't mean they didn't belong there. From an early age, Jasmine was drawn to the fight for justice. She didn't just study the law. She saw it as a tool, one that could be wielded to protect people who'd been ignored, underestimated, or cast aside. After graduating from law school, she chose the harder path. Instead of chasing corporate money, she became a public defender, stepping into courtrooms where her clients often had no one else to speak for them. Day after day, she fought to keep people from being swallowed by a system that too often saw them as statistics. It was brutal work, long hours, low pay, relentless pressure. But it forged something unbreakable in her. A refusal to be intimidated by power, and a commitment to speak truth, even when it shakes the room. Those battles in court would become the foundation for everything that followed. When she transitioned into politics, Crockett carried that same fire with her. In the Texas House of Representatives, she quickly built a reputation as a fierce advocate for voting rights, criminal justice reform, and economic fairness. She didn't just deliver speeches. She delivered results. But it wasn't easy. In a state house often dominated by old guard politics and entrenched interests, she was dismissed, mocked, and underestimated. And each time she responded the same way. Not with bitterness, but with sharper arguments, deeper research, and an even louder voice for those who had none. Her fearlessness caught national attention during one of the most dramatic political battles in Texas in recent memory: the fight over restrictive voting laws. As state Republicans pushed through legislation aimed at making it harder for marginalized communities to vote, Crockett became one of the most vocal and relentless opponents. She clashed with powerful committee chairs, dissected bills line by line, and refused to back down even when the backlash turned personal. Clips of her fiery floor speeches spread across social media, earning her a growing following of people, especially young, progressive, and immigrant communities, who saw in her a reflection of themselves, unapologetic, unafraid, and unwilling to accept second-class status. But Crockett wasn't just about fiery words. Her style was surgical, a blend of passion and precision that left opponents scrambling. In hearings, she would dismantle misleading claims with calm, lawyerly poise, turning sound bites back on the people who uttered them. When opponents tried to paint her as angry or radical, she flipped the narrative, pointing out that demanding equality shouldn't be mistaken for rage. It's patriotism in its purest form. Each battle hardened her resolve and sharpened her instincts. It was that blend, fire and focus, emotion and intellect, that made her such a formidable presence on the national stage. And it's what made her a perfect counterweight to figures like Charlie Kirk. Kirk thrived on provoking reactions. Crockett thrived on dismantling provocations. Kirk built strawmen. Crockett burned them down with facts and moral clarity. Kirk sought attention. Crockett sought accountability. For many watching her rise, Jasmine represented more than just another politician. She was proof that the voices once pushed to the margins could stand at the center. She was proof that a black woman from a working-class background could walk into the most hostile spaces and speak with authority. And she was proof that dignity, real, grounded dignity, could still cut through the noise. By the time she faced Kirk on that stage, Crockett was no stranger to hostility disguised as debate. She had sparred with lawmakers who underestimated her, pundits who tried to caricature her, and trolls who tried to silence her. Every insult, every obstacle, every condescending dismissal had built toward this moment. This wasn't just another debate for Jasmine. It was a stand for something bigger, for every voice ever told it didn't belong, for every community ever dismissed as other, for every person who still believes that America's promise is wide enough to include them too. And when Kirk tried his usual trick, the insult, the provocation, the bait he had used 100 times before, Jasmine Crockett was more than ready. The tension was already thick when Charlie Kirk leaned forward and doubled down, but what came next took the room from uneasy to electric. He paced slightly, savoring the attention, his voice rising with each new provocation. "You know what the real problem is?" he said, scanning the audience as if about to reveal a forbidden truth. "We've let people who don't even believe in this country tell us how to run it. They come here from broken nations and think they can lecture us about justice, about democracy, about who we are. Newsflash, if you can't even build a functioning country, maybe sit this one out." A wave of gasps rippled through the auditorium. Some in the crowd clapped, their cheers sharp and brittle. Others exchanged stunned looks, as if even Kirk's usual theatrics had gone too far. You could almost feel the arrogance dripping from every word, the smirk that followed, the shrug that implied he'd just said something brave rather than bigoted. It was a textbook Kirk move, provoke, polarize, then bask in the reaction. But across from him, Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She let the silence stretch, let his words hang heavy in the air. And then, with a calm so steady it felt like defiance, she leaned into her microphone. "Are you done?" she asked softly. The room shifted. Laughter, nervous but genuine, bubbled up from somewhere in the back. Kirk's grin faltered just slightly. "Because if you are," she continued, "I'd like to clarify a few things. First, this country, the one you're talking about, was built by people who weren't supposed to belong. Immigrants, enslaved people, refugees, people who, according to your logic, should have had no say in its future. And yet without them, there is no America. There is no democracy. There is no you standing here on this stage." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Crockett spoke with the precision of someone who'd been preparing for this fight her entire life. Her tone was measured, her phrasing deliberate, each sentence landing like a quiet hammer. Kirk shifted again, this time with less swagger. "That's not what I said," he interjected, his voice louder now, more defensive. "It's exactly what you said," she replied, still calm. "And it's what you've said over and over in different ways. You build this false hierarchy of worthiness. Who's American enough? Who's allowed to speak? Whose voice counts? And then you pretend it's just common sense. But it's not common, Charlie. It's not even sense. It's fear dressed up as patriotism." The room erupted. Not in chaos, but in that rare, charged silence that follows a truth too sharp to ignore. Kirk tried to fire back, to twist her words into something easier to dismiss. He accused her of hating America, of playing the victim, of making everything about race. Each accusation was met with Crockett's steady gaze and surgical precision. "Loving America," she said, "means wanting it to be better. And wanting it to be better means telling the truth about where we've failed. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's not patriotism you care about. Maybe it's just power." By now the tension wasn't just in the room, it was online. Phones were out. Tweets were flying. Clips were already being trimmed, captioned, shared. The algorithm was watching, and it liked what it saw. Crockett vs. Kirk began climbing the trending list. And though Kirk didn't know it yet, his words were about to be played back to millions. Not as the bold truth he imagined, but as the reckless rant they were. The debate was no longer a debate. It was a collision. Two visions of America smashing into each other in real time. On one side, arrogance and exclusion, desperate to hold on to its dominance. On the other, dignity and truth, refusing to yield. And as the clash intensified, the outcome began to feel inevitable. Kirk's interruptions grew more frantic. Crockett's tone remained unshaken. The harder he pushed, the more composed she became. And then, Jasmine delivered the line that would break the internet. The moment was coiled tight as a spring. Charlie Kirk had thrown every jab in his arsenal, the dog whistles, the straw men, the smirking dismissals. But Jasmine Crockett hadn't flinched once. Now, the room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for her next move. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't with anger or theatrics. It was with precision, the kind of clarity that cuts deeper than any insult ever could. "You know what's fascinating, Charlie?" She began, her tone conversational, almost curious. "You talk a lot about who belongs in America, about who deserves a voice. But every time you do, you forget something fundamental. No one appointed you the gatekeeper of patriotism." A low rumble of applause rolled through the audience. Kirk forced a laugh, trying to wave it off. "I'm just saying we need people who love this country." "Love?" Crockett interrupted gently, tilting her head. "You think love looks like tearing down everyone who doesn't look like you, pray like you, or vote like you? Because where I come from, love is building. Love is sacrifice. Love is a grandmother who worked 2 jobs so her kids could have a shot. Love is a dreamer risking everything to finish college. Love is a black soldier fighting for a country that still denied him the right to vote. That's love, Charlie. Not hashtags, not sound bites. Sacrifice." The room erupted. Applause thundered against the walls. Kirk shifted in his chair, his usual composure slipping as he reached for a counterattack. "That's emotional nonsense," he snapped. "We're talking about facts. We're talking about protecting American values." Crockett nodded slowly. "Facts. I'm glad you brought those up." She leaned closer to the microphone. "Here's a fact. Immigrants are twice as likely to start businesses in this country as native-born Americans. Here's another. They pay billions more into our tax system than they ever take out. And here's a third. The very Constitution you claim to defend guarantees equal protection and freedom of speech to everyone within our borders, not just the ones you personally approve of." Kirk opened his mouth, but no words came. His usual arsenal of comebacks suddenly seemed flimsy, inadequate against the weight of documented truth. Cameras zoomed in on his face, capturing the split second where bravado faltered into something closer to frustration. "And let's talk about values," Crockett continued, her voice rising slightly now, "because you invoke them as if they're yours alone to define. But America's greatest values, liberty, equality, justice, were never meant to be the property of one party, one race, or one ideology. They belong to all of us, and if you truly believed in them, you wouldn't spend so much time trying to exclude people from them." The applause was louder now, no longer polite but defiant. People were on their feet. The air buzzed with the kind of energy that signals a turning point. Even those who had come to cheer for Kirk sat back in stunned silence, their expressions shifting as Crockett's words hit deeper than they expected. Kirk, visibly rattled, tried again. "So you're saying anyone who criticizes immigration policy is a racist?" "No," Crockett replied calmly. "I'm saying that when your criticism sounds like contempt, when it paints entire communities as threats or parasites, then yes, you're crossing a line. And more importantly, you're betraying the very ideals you claim to uphold." That line landed like a hammer. You could feel the air shift. Kirk's smirk, the trademark expression he'd worn through countless debates, began to fade. His voice, usually so sharp and confident, came out tighter now. "I love this country," he said, his tone defensive. "And so do they," Crockett shot back without missing a beat. "So do the people you mock, the ones you dismiss. They love it enough to believe it can be better. And that's the difference, Charlie. You want praise for how America is. We want progress for what it could be." It was the pivot point, the sentence that would be replayed millions of times, stitched into TikToks, quoted in op-eds, turned into protest signs and t-shirts. Phones were out everywhere now, screens glowing in the darkened hall, hashtags multiplied by the second. Crockett clapback, truth vs propaganda, and this is America. Kirk tried one last swing, his voice rising, his words tumbling over each other. You're twisting everything. This country is under attack. From the left, from the media, from people who don't even respect its history. Respect its history? Crockett repeated, her voice now carrying the weight of someone who had lived every word she was about to speak. Respecting history means telling all of it, not just the parts that make you comfortable. It means acknowledging the people who built this nation without credit. It means facing the injustices we've committed, not burying them under slogans. And it means understanding that America's story isn't finished yet. It's still being written, by all of us. That was the moment the room truly broke. People were shouting, clapping, some even wiping away tears. Kirk sat back, visibly furious but unsure how to respond. Every attempted interruption had been dismantled with ease. Every insult had been reframed as an opportunity for truth. He wasn't leading the conversation anymore. He was chasing it. Commentators in the crowd could sense it too. She's running circles around him, one whispered. This is a masterclass. The cameras caught it all. Kirk's faltering posture, the beads of sweat on his forehead, the widening gulf between the image he'd built and the reality unfolding before him, and Crockett wasn't done. You said earlier that people from broken nations shouldn't lecture. America, she said, returning to the remark that had sparked the confrontation. But maybe, just maybe, people who've known struggle, who've fought for freedom, who've built something from nothing. Maybe they're the ones most qualified to teach us what resilience and democracy actually mean. The audience roared. Kirk closed his eyes briefly, as if wishing the ground would swallow him whole. His playbook, the same one that had made him a conservative star, had failed him here. Strawmen crumbled under the weight of data. Mockery evaporated in the face of lived experience. The crowd, once mixed, now leaned unmistakably toward Crockett. This wasn't just a takedown, one journalist would write hours later. It was a recalibration, a reminder that intelligence, grace, and conviction still matter, even in a political landscape addicted to outrage. As the moderator called time, Kirk muttered something about media bias and political correctness. It didn't matter. The damage was done. The narrative had shifted. Jasmine Crockett rose from her seat to a standing ovation, not with the swagger of someone who had won a debate, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had spoken a deeper truth. Kirk avoided her gaze as they walked off stage. She didn't need his acknowledgement, the crowd's reaction, the flood of clips online, the seismic ripple across social media were acknowledgement enough. In the hours that followed, the video would rack up millions of views. Hashtags would trend across platforms. Even some conservative commentators would admit grudgingly that Kirk had been outclassed. And as Crockett stepped backstage, greeted by cheers and embraces, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a victory for her. It was a victory for every person who'd been told they didn't belong, for every immigrant, every outsider, every voice dismissed by those who claimed America as their exclusive inheritance. But the shockwaves didn't stop in that room. The debate was over, but the real explosion was just beginning. Within minutes of Jasmine Crockett stepping off that stage, the clip of her takedown was everywhere, sliced into viral highlights, remixed with music, captioned with fire emojis, and shared with captions like, "She ate and left no crumbs," and "This is how you handle hate." Twitter, or X, as some now stubbornly called it, couldn't stop talking. The hashtag and Crockett clapback shot to #1 nationally in under an hour. By sunrise the next morning, it had surpassed 2 million mentions. People were quoting her lines verbatim. Maybe the people who've known struggle are the most qualified to teach us what democracy means. That one alone had been reposted over 300,000 times. Another user stitched her monologue about love into a video montage of immigrant families, frontline workers, and civil rights marches. It hit 12 million views in 24 hours. The response was more than just praise. It was catharsis. Across timelines, people who had felt invisible or demeaned by rhetoric like Kirk's suddenly had language for their pride. "I showed this clip to my mom, who came here with nothing," one tweet read. She cried, "Thank you, Jasmine, for saying what we've always felt." Another viral comment said simply, "For once, dignity fought back," and won. Mainstream media scrambled to catch up. By the next morning, Crockett's name was on the front pages of major outlets. MSNBC opened its primetime hour with the headline, "Reputable Jasmine Crockett Schools, Charlie Kirk in Viral Showdown." The Washington Post ran a feature titled, "A New Voice for a New America," profiling Crockett's journey and why this moment resonated so deeply. Even international media picked it up. The Guardian described it as a generational flashpoint in the culture wars, and Le Monde in France called it a debate that revealed America's future. Not everyone was celebrating, of course. Conservative influencers rushed to contain the damage. Some accused Crockett of being overly emotional. Others tried to downplay the clip as liberal media spin. Charlie Kirk himself tweeted late that night, "The left doesn't want debate, they want applause lines. Facts still matter." But the post fell flat, buried beneath a storm of quote tweets correcting his facts with the statistics Crockett had cited. A few of Kirk's own supporters were brutally honest. "This was a rough night," one right-wing commentator admitted on his podcast. Kirk walked into that thinking he'd dominate. He didn't. Crockett was better prepared, more disciplined. And honestly, she owned the moment. Another tweeted, "He's usually sharp, but this time, it looked like a varsity player getting schooled by an all-star." Meanwhile, celebrities joined the fray. Kerry Washington reposted the clip with the caption, "This is how you speak truth to power." Lin-Manuel Miranda called Crockett's speech a masterclass in patriotism. Even some unexpected figures chimed in. NBA stars, pop icons, and immigrant entrepreneurs shared their own stories under the Crockett clapback tag. It wasn't just political anymore, it had become cultural. And that was the real power of what happened. It wasn't just that Jasmine Crockett dismantled Charlie Kirk in a debate. It was that the moment reframed the entire conversation about who gets to define America. Suddenly, it wasn't Kirk's narrative, the one built on fear, resentment, and exclusion, dominating the feed. It was hers. A vision of America as a story still being written. One where sacrifice and diversity weren't threats, but proof of strength. The ripple effects went beyond social media. Donations to Crockett's re-election campaign spiked overnight. Progressive organizations reported surges in volunteer sign-ups. One nonprofit working with newly naturalized citizens said traffic to their website quadrupled within 48 hours. "People want to do something," the group's director said. "They feel seen." Think pieces flooded the internet. What Crockett did wasn't just win an argument, read one essay in The Atlantic. She redefined the playing field. Another op-ed put it more bluntly. Charlie Kirk may have the microphone, but Jasmine Crockett now has the momentum. It was, in many ways, the perfect storm, a powerful message, delivered with grace, landing at a moment when millions were hungry for something to believe in. And as the days passed, the clip didn't fade like so many viral moments do. It deepened. It evolved. It became a rallying cry at protests, a case study in classrooms, a source of hope for people who had grown weary of the noise. One viral comment summed it up best. "This isn't about Kirk versus Crockett anymore. This is about what kind of country we want to be." And tonight, for the first time in a long time, it felt like the future showed up. But as powerful as the online eruption was, something even more profound was happening beneath the surface. A shift that couldn't be measured in likes or retweets. Because this moment wasn't just a viral flash, it was a turning point, and its deeper meaning was only beginning to unfold. In the end, this was never just about a debate stage or a viral clip. It wasn't even about Jasmine Crockett and Charlie Kirk as individuals. It was about something far deeper. The timeless collision between truth and arrogance, between those who cling to power through fear and those who challenge it with courage. And in that collision, America saw a glimpse of the story it's still struggling to write. Crockett's message, stripped of all the noise, was painfully simple. Love of country isn't measured by how loudly you shout its name, but by how fiercely you fight to make it live up to its promise. That's why her words hit so hard. They weren't rehearsed applause lines. They were rooted in the lived reality of millions who have been told, again and again, that they don't belong. She wasn't just defending immigrants or calling out hypocrisy. She was redefining patriotism itself. And that redefinition mattered. Because the fight over America's soul has never been about slogans. It's about whether we confront uncomfortable truths or bury them, whether we build bridges or walls. whether our democracy grows stronger because more people believe in it, or weaker because we shut them out. Charlie Kirk's brand of politics thrives on division precisely because division is easier than introspection. It's easier to point fingers than to face the mirror. But as Crockett reminded the country, truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand its ground. That's the thing about arrogance. It can dominate the room for a while. It can trend. It can get the headlines. But it's fragile. The moment it's confronted with clarity and courage, it starts to crumble. And that's what we witnessed in that debate. Arrogance collapsing under the weight of truth. A smirk fading when facts walk in the door. But Crockett's stand wasn't without cost. Speaking truth to power never is. It means absorbing the insults, the distortions, the backlash. It means putting yourself on the line, knowing that trolls and pundits will try to twist every word. Yet it's precisely that cost that gives truth its strength. Because every person who's ever changed this country, every suffragist, every civil rights leader, every whistleblower, has paid it. Crockett walked onto that stage carrying their legacy, and in that moment she added her own chapter to the story. And here's the part that matters most. This isn't just her story. It's ours, because this fight, the fight against propaganda, against smallness, against the politics of contempt, isn't won by one debate or one speech. It's won by ordinary people refusing to be silent, by voters showing up, by citizens choosing empathy over apathy, by conversations at dinner tables and classrooms and workplaces that slowly, stubbornly shift the culture toward something better. You see, what Jasmine Crockett did wasn't magic. It was courage. And courage is contagious. It spreads. It multiplies. It ignites something in people who've been told their voices don't matter and whispers, yes, they do. That's why this moment will echo far beyond a trending hashtag. Because arrogance might shout the loudest, but dignity always echoes longest. And dignity is what America is built on, even if we forget it sometimes. Dignity is the teacher who stays late to help a student who just arrived from another country. It's the neighbor who defends someone being targeted for how they worship or who they love. It's every person who refuses to believe that hate has the final word. So when we look back on this viral debate, it won't be remembered as that time Kirk lost his temper, or that night Crockett went viral. It will be remembered as a line in the sand, a moment when the noise was challenged and the narrative began to shift. A reminder that in a democracy worth saving, truth is not optional. It's the foundation. And that's the power of what happened here. One woman, one stage, one voice, and a ripple that reminded millions they were never alone. Because arrogance fades, propaganda burns out. But truth has a way of enduring. And in that room on that night, truth stood taller than the lies ever could. In the end, Jasmine Crockett didn't just expose an insane Charlie Kirk clip. She exposed a mindset. A mindset built on arrogance, exclusion, and fear. And she didn't defeat it with anger or insults. She dismantled it with truth, with dignity, with the unshakable belief that America belongs to all of us. That's what this moment was really about. Not just one debate, not just one takedown. It was about the kind of country we want to be. One where facts matter more than sound bites, where courage speaks louder than contempt, and where no one gets to decide who belongs based on their skin, their story, or their surname. And here's the part too many people forget. This fight doesn't end when the clip stops playing. It continues every single day, in our conversations, our votes, our voices. Jasmine did her part on that stage. Now, the rest is up to us. If you believe in voices like hers, voices that speak truth to power and refuse to back down, then be part of this. Hit subscribe, share this story, leave a comment about what this moment meant to you, because every time you do, you help make sure arrogance never drowns out truth again. This isn't just a channel, it's a movement, one built on justice, on dignity, on the idea that America is strongest when it belongs to everyone. And if you're ready to stand for that, then you're exactly where you belong. The fight isn't over. But tonight, truth took the microphone, and it's not letting go.